Okay, my outstanding friends, prepare yourself. This is Sabine Hassenfelder. She's a very renowned physicist and a science, communicator. And she's got well over 1 million subscribers, and she's been on the fence. I've been watching her for a couple of years now, and she realizes that everything's wrong. And she's in this realm, and it's very, very difficult to speak in this realm and stay in this realm. And I saw this today, and I was thrilled, because here's what it says: why academia sucks. She's given up finally. She's coming straight out with it. This is exceptional, very exceptional. She is exceptional, and I like her presentation first of all. And she realizes we're being misled by the people we're trusting to investigate. I think that's the case. Now, we're going to go through this video, and I'm going to assess it with you. Fair Use Act. I'm not stealing her stuff. I just want to see what she has to say and see if I agree or disagree, and you can make your own agreements or disagreement with it. But when I saw this, I was just shocked, because she says, how I fell out of love with academia. She's an academic, but she's now becoming truthful. That's not the way it works in academia. You say what you're told to say, or you get off the stage, and she's probably going to suffer some consequences from this, I would certainly assume. But I applaud anybody that stands up for what they feel is correct, regardless of the cost. And let's see, if she gets out of this unscathed. She's got enough people now. I think she can maybe get away with this. Let's see. Okay, I just want to let you know I am filled with excitement because I'm hoping she's going to just let it loose. She says, my dream died and now I'm here. Now, she has 1.2 million subscribers, 1.2 million. This is only one day ago. She's got 500,000 hits. Now, and she says, my dream died and now how I'm, academia sucks. So let's see what she has to say, and I am going to stop as we go along and make my comments about her statements. It's 13.4 minutes, 13 and 40 seconds, and it's Sabine Hassenfelder. You come up and watch the whole thing without my interruptions. People sometimes don't like it when I interrupt, but that's the best way I have to do my little spiel. So here goes. Okay, now I haven't watched this. I'm just really excited by the title. Here goes.
When I signed up for studying at the university, I thought being a physicist was my dream job. But here I am on YouTube. How did that happen? I think I owe you an explanation. When I started studying at the university, my expectations were based on biographies of scientists. They wrote a lot of letters to each other. They went to conferences. They were thinkers and tinkerers and had sometimes heated but usually respectful arguments. This is what I expected. Yes, that was hopelessly naive, I know. But in my defense, I don't come from an academic background. I come from a family of teachers and accountants and post office workers. They're normal people. I did an internship in the chemical industry and another one in a bank, gleefully stamping transfer slips. I just didn't know anyone with a PhD, and those were the early 1990s. You couldn't just ask the internet and within a day you'd have 2,000 people giving you advice and some marriage proposals along with that. The first years at university were glorious because for the first time in my life I was in the company of other people who were like me. At school I had always been the weird one for actually being interested in science and maths, but at the university everyone was like that. We talked about everything from maths to philosophy, physics and politics. And yes, alcohol was involved. It was a really good time. And that was all very nice, except I was getting older and still didn't have a decent job. I made a little money by selling oil paintings. Those were the days, people. But I didn't seriously think I was a particularly good artist. I really had to get a normal job and stop asking my grandma to help out with paying rent. I thought that the Institute of Physics would give me a job when I'd finished my master's degree with good grades, though technically at the time that was called a diploma. I thought they'd give me a job because that had worked for all the other students previously. If your grades were good, they'd offer you a job as a graduate student. It wasn't particularly great pay, but it was a real job. And that's where things started to go wrong. Because I finished my exams with excellent grades. I don't mean to brag, but I think you need this context. But I wasn't offered a job because I'm a woman. I'm not guessing that that's what happened. I know because they told me. You see, the guy who was head of the institute told me that since I'm female, I should apply for a scholarship that was exclusively for women in the natural sciences, because then the institute wouldn't have to pay for me. Makes sense, doesn't it? So, well, I applied for the scholarship and got it, all right. But these scholarships don't come with any benefits like pension savings and health insurance, and I know they sound very German, but these things matter to us. Also, I was now reminded on various occasions that I wasn't actually employed at the institute. I was just there because I had this scholarship for women. And that was totally true. This, by the way, is why I'm against programs or positions that are exclusively for women. I think that treating women differently just reinforces the prejudice that women are less capable than men. But I digress. All right, you might say, stop whining, at least I did have an income now. Yes, so far so good. At this time I was the only woman at the institute who was not in the administration. The next problem was that the head of the institute made a lot of money selling textbooks. He wrote very little of these textbooks himself. Rather, he gave assignments for parts of the books to students and postdocs, which is why, in case you've ever wondered, these textbooks are so discontinuous and partly repetitive. He expected me to also work for him, to which I said no. I was then ordered into his office, in which he gave me a very angry speech, according to which I wasn't loyal to all the other students who did their part. I told him that I was under no obligation to work for him and didn't care what the rest of the students were thinking. He got angry, I laughed at him, he started shouting that I was fired and physically shoved me out of his office. True story. The irony is that he couldn't fire me because, if you remember, he had refused to hire me in the first place. I was paid by that scholarship for women, and that wasn't managed by the institute but by the office of the university president. I'm not just telling you this because it's entertaining. It was also a rather rude awakening. It made me realize that this institute wasn't about knowledge discovery, it was about money making. And the more I saw of
I think I'm falling in love. Sabine, that's it, baby. That is it. It's 100% about funding. Yale stole my research. I presented them with all of the Mudfossil research, and they published a paper a year later getting funding from NASA and a whole bunch of other people. It was basically reproduced my paper. So this is just, it's not unusual, and I would love to assist you in this exposition of these what's going on. It needs to be known and be understood, just like she's talking about here. I have stories that are just mind-bending. I'm telling you right now. With and Velikovsky was destroyed. Very few people know about him, but the ones that do know what they did to him. They destroyed him, and they would destroy her if they could. But she's right now. She's in good shape. She's got enough of a following. She's going to get by. So let's see what she has to say again. But Sabine, keep it up, sweetie. You're doing a great job.
Academia, the more I realized it wasn't just this particular institute and this particular professor. It was generally the case. The moment you put people into big institutions, the goal shifts from knowledge discovery to money making.
Same thing with Fermilab. Exactly. Thank you, Sabine. It's time somebody with credentials like you has spoken. Thank you.
Is how this works. If a researcher gets a scholarship or research grant, then the institution gets part of that money. It's called the overhead. Technically, that's meant to pay for offices and equipment and administration, etc. But academic institutions then pay part of their staff from this overhead, so they need to keep that overhead coming. Small scholarships don't make much money, but research grants can be tens of millions of dollars, and the overhead can be anything between 15 and 50%. This is why research institutions exert loads of pressure on researchers to bring in grant money, and partly they do this by keeping the researchers on temporary contracts so that they need grants to get paid themselves, while the administrators who are paid on the overhead usually have permanent positions. But you get used to this kind of crap, and the overhead isn't even the real problem. The real problem is that the easiest way to grow in academia is to pay other people to produce papers on which you, as the grant holder, can put your name. That's how academia works. Grants pay students and postdocs to produce research papers for the grant holder, and those papers are what the supervisor then uses to apply for more grants. The result is a paper production machine in which
It's identical what Yale did to me. I presented all the research to Yale, to Derek Briggs at Yale, and then they took that research and got grant money from a whole bunch of different places and recreated it, basically, only made it sound like there was no giants, and they never mentioned me at all, and they never mentioned my DNA, they never mentioned anything. And as a matter of fact, let's just go and prove that right this moment. All right, I've shown this probably 100 times in the last couple of years. Exceptional preservation of soft-bodied creatures promoted by silica-rich oceans. This is the guy right here, Derek Briggs. Now, this was funded by NASA and a whole bunch of other places. And this is in 2016. This is the Yale paper that they show on campus, talking about how they figured all this stuff out, about the sea creatures of the Ediacara biota. That's just a name. That means that that's just a name they threw on it. These are just soft-bodied creatures that preserved as mud fossils. And I have them coming out of my ears. And I had mine DNA tested and CAT scanned and everything, and presented my evidence to Derek Briggs for 3-4 years at least, and my papers and the DNA and the CAT scans, and then they took credit for it, and got paid by all kinds of people. Right, here's it. The paper was co-authored by Ashley Hood. This is the exact same thing. These are all students, I think, that did the work, and who was a Yale postdoctoral associate. Derek Briggs, who was the top guy there, who's the guy I went to for years. He refused to do anything with it, and he just told me, "Oh, they're just rocks. They're just rocks." And then he got this is all about him. He's just a big shot there, and he's literally plagiarized my work, and so I'm just saying that's exactly what happens. And then the research supported by National Science Foundation, Earth Sciences Postdoctoral Fellowship, a grant from the American Philosophical Society, Clark Fund, a NASA Exobiologist grant, NASA Postdoctoral Fellowship, and a Foundation of Complex Life. And that was my work. This is from 2016, and they're talking about a worldwide flood that all these creatures died in this flood. And it was 540 million years ago, they're saying, which none of that stuff is true. The true part is that there was a worldwide flood, and it compacted all these creatures in mud. They say it was sand, it was mud. And it was dissolved silica, yes, because of the oceans created this supersaturation of silica due to the sloshing of the oceans. See, they're saying these are creatures that it completely wiped out all these creatures off the face of the earth. And they said many of them are outright bizarre in appearance. There's nothing like them today, the organisms alive today. We'd like to understand their relationship to the complex life. Are these organisms some sort of failed evolutionary experiment, which is true, they were? or do they include the ancestors of animals that are around today? Now they're saying, how did these soft-bodied creatures turn into stone? And they're saying they were all soft bodies, no shells, no teeth, no bones, which are typically the only parts. So it says the animals themselves were entirely soft bodies. That's not true. There was bones. They just turned into stone. That is still a tiny, tiny taste of bone. In a microscope, you can see that. And I mean, everything turned into stone in this particular heavy silicate flood. Even my goose here, Caesar. Right? That's Caesar Augustus. And there's his feathers and everything just preserved flawlessly. And that's the flat side where he laid there dying. That's his neck, and if you know how to look at it, you can see where the neck actually was. But this is nucleophilic substitution. This is something I fully understood and presented all this to Yale. And then they took credit for it, and we paid for it as taxpayers. This is the kind of stuff that goes on. And God bless Sabine. Now, I had three things CAT scan. Well, I had three things DNA tested. One of them was his lung, and this lung is absolutely flawless. And that even is the impression where the heart would have been. The guy died laying flat like this. It boiled all of the flesh off, just like in a cooking pot. And what was left was the organs, and they're just disassociated. And it's because of the heavy silicates in this hot water, long duration flood. This is DNA tested. It CAT scanned everything. So there's no question what it is. And anybody that knows what a human organ looks like, a lung, knows that. And that's the flap on the bottom of the lung that it holds it into the rest of the body. And there was one up here too. That's what holds your lung in position. Now, so this stuff is not, my stuff is completely 100% certain. No question whatsoever. And again, Yale took credit for my work. She says 100% right. And she's the only one I've seen stand up in academia yet. So I think she's a hero. All right, this was from 2015. Everything was done. I had DNA, I had CAT scans, I had all of this stuff was done. And I talk about this silicon, 50 times more silicon. And I talk about the fascia separating everything, which is the fascia. In the case of a lung, they call it pleur. Same thing, the fascia. The coating is what preserved everything. And it's because it's made out of collagens, which is phospho stuff. And it boiled down to become aluminum silicates. So phosphorus came down to aluminum silicates. I could work with Sabine. I would love to be involved with her. We could even have like a television show or something. It would be the presentation of the alternate new scientific research. I work in every field. Sabine, please, please, Sabine. Now listen, this is what I put up 8 years ago. Fascia is instrumental in perfectly preserved fossilization in wet, fine, continuously wet mud. The product can be exact copies of living creatures, flesh, colors, and all. And I have them right here, like this piece of meat. And once you put a little tiny taste of water on mudfossils, which is basically any rock almost, they just immediately rehydrate and they become just like they were red blood before. It's the iron is the key. Oxygenation states of iron they're all over the place. And there's a lot of iron in this because that's blood. That's a bloody red tissue. All right. That's just what it is. And that is a lung. So this is not unknown. This was all presented to Yale. Now, and Derek Briggs is the one that's taking credit for this research. And I talk about the whole thing about the connective tissue, highly mineralized, 50 times more silicon, fascia facilitated fossilization. I call it mud fossils now because I was thinking it was strictly due to the fascia, which primarily it is, because it's aluminum silicates, which is from fascia. But more important is the perfect preservation comes from the impacting it in mud and having it being invaded in that mud with transition metals and heavy silicates. So I changed the name to Mudfossils. But this is the same thing, and this was years before. And I had worked with Derek Briggs back and forth. We went back, and it got to be very contentious. And then all of a sudden, I see he took credit for it and put that paper up, and we, as citizens, paid. He got funding from everybody. It's exactly what Sabine is saying. This is disgraceful. All right, you see this? This is the National Library of Medicine. Procedures for investigating academic fraud. Well, it's the most important part is, what is academic fraud? It says the first task of this committee was to define academic fraud. So let's see what the definition of fraud is in academia. In the abstract, the definition seems easy. It just seems very easy. But even if the identification of fraud in individual cases is not, the definition of fraud distinguishes between an honest mistake, which everybody makes, and deliberate misstatement made with an intention to deceive others. Now, it doesn't have to be a misstatement. It can be this. Academic fraud involves a deliberate effort to deceive and includes plagiarism, like Derek Briggs did. Fabrication of data, well, they changed the data so that it wasn't mud fossils, it was sand, but that's not a big deal. Misrepresentation of historical sources, that doesn't play in. Tampering with evidence, that doesn't necessarily play in. Selective suppression of unwanted or unacceptable results and theft of ideas. That's exactly what they did at Yale. It says some cases are easy to prove and detect and prove. Yes, I have all the evidence to show it. My papers were up. I submitted all that stuff. I even wrote a book about this a year before Yale took the money from NASA and everything else and took credit for my work. All right, so this is the procedure for estimating. I see it as fraud myself. I don't know, maybe you don't, but I do. All right, so here we are back to Sabine, and I'm just going to go right through her whole video because she's doing a fabulous job. This is what they're all about, is money. It's a money factory now, and they're scamming the students. They don't really care about truth. That's what I have found. I just showed you. It's academic fraud as far as I'm concerned at Yale. And everywhere else I spoke to them, they didn't want to speak because they couldn't speak to my evidence and continue to say the things they were saying. It just was not possible. But Yale was just, that is easy to prove. It says some of them are easy to prove, some of them are hard to prove. Well, Yale's case is not hard to prove at all. That's exactly what happened. So here goes Sabine Hassenfelder again.
Research papers for the grant holder, and those papers are what the supervisor then uses to apply for more grants. The result is a paper production machine in which students and postdocs are burned through to bring in money for the institution. Most of that money comes from your taxes. After my PhD, I applied for another scholarship and got that, and then I got a postdoc job and a grant and another job and another job and another grant and so on. And I began to understand what you need to do to get a grant or get hired. You have to work on topics that are mainstream enough, but not too mainstream. You want them to be a little bit edgy, but not too edgy. No, it needs to be something that fits into the existing machinery. And since most grants are 3 years or 5 years at most, it also needs to be something that can be wrapped up quickly. The more I saw of this, the more I realized this wasn't how I wanted to spend my life. The other thing that happened was that the more I saw of the foundations of physics, the more I became convinced that most of the research there wasn't based on sound scientific principles. I know this sounds wild, like I'm the crank next door on YouTube, and maybe that's what I am, but I like to think that my argument was, and still is, very academic. I never intended it to be offensive. I just explained why thinking up new particles isn't a good strategy for progress in physics, and why that had gotten an entire discipline stuck. And naive as I was, I expected physicists to think about it. I expected rational debate.
Exactly, Sabine. And it just doesn't happen. They're really mental-sided, which means their brains are so washed they cannot come out of it. Now, they also realize that it's dangerous to their status and position in life. Now, I'm not sure which one is more dominant, whether it's just they're brainwashed and they don't see it. I suppose that's possible, but I really can't, not the stuff I show. It's just impossible. However, it is very possible that they want to protect their livelihoods, and that's what I think is going on. So she said she expected rational debate. Well, I'm sure she didn't get it.
But that never came. No one was interested. No one is interested. They were interested in writing more papers. And that's what they need all these particles and other wild ideas for. To write papers, to get grants, to get postdocs, to write more papers. And round it goes. Meanwhile, I had moved half around the world because that's standard for postdocs. It's just left.
All right, she's right. We need all new books, and we got them. We've got them started. Sabine, hook up with me, Sabine. We can make this happen. I have research on literally every scientific topic, and I mean in depth. So let's get back to Sabine. I wish I could get in contact with her. I've been dropping hints all over the place, posting on her Facebook page. If anybody can help me to get in contact with Sabine, I would be very, very pleased. See this? She says nobody's interested. Exactly. I presented all this information to Fermilab. They told me to get away, don't ever come back again. These are the particles of light that we use and saw, which is the exact same identical particles. These are Fermilab's particles. We found the exact same thing. We accelerated light. We took those particles that are attached normally, solidly attached. They never come apart. They're supposed to be like that. That's a photon. But we forced them to separate through a Venturi using pulsed red laser. No interest whatsoever from Fermilab. This is Fermilab's particles. We created sterile muons and electron showers. That is the holy grail of physics. And here's Don Lincoln's, this is the same particles. Exactly same particles. Smallest particles they can find. So we did fission, fusion, all of this stuff. And this was 9 years ago. I presented this to Fermilab, to Don Lincoln himself. And we went back and forth until it became very contentious again. You just never get anywhere. All right? And he does agree that there is no such thing as empty space. Empty space isn't empty. It's saturated with particles. And we showed that too. And I showed it to him too. And nothing made any sense. And to him, he would say. And he's always asking, if you want a phrase defined, you have a question, email me. Well, I tried that. And he said, no, don't ever email me again. And he says right here, quantum foam is real. The universe is not only stranger than we imagine, it is stranger than we can imagine. No, I know what it is, and I can see what it is, and you can't, Don. That's the problem. And he's in charge. He's a spokesman for Fermilab, which is another billions of dollars a year. And NASA's another $20 billion this year. And that's what they do, is they walk around in circles to try to find money. It's just the way it works now. You see this? NASA funded Yale, partially at least, I don't know how much they gave him, a NASA exobiology grant, a NASA postdoctoral fellowship, Foundation for Complex Life. All of these things contributed to Yale's plagiarism of my work. And this was the paper that was about they announced it in 2016 on campus by Are We Smart? And this was about the exceptional preservation of soft-bodied Ediacarta biota promoted by silica-rich oceans. Exactly what I presented to them. Derek Briggs was the guy I presented it to. So I'd like to hear from Derek. Because I've tried, and I've sent this to everybody at Yale. I mean, everybody, literally, from the president on down. And Derek's assistant, Armand Morgan. Remember Armand? I told you one day you would look like fools. Well, this is the day, my friend. And Armand's last word to me says, well, I guess we won't be the only ones. Armand, brilliant statement, my friend. By the way, thank you. You were very gracious. I know I was a little bit obnoxious, but that's just the way it works. Okay, you know about my dipole flood theory, which is only two particles. And she's talking about wild ideas about new particles. Well, when you present those, you are not well received, trust me. And she knows this is exactly what she's talking about. You have to stay right on the edge of being a little bit edgy, but you can't go too far. That will throw you off the stage. All right, went back a smidge here. She realized she doesn't want to spend her life making up just nonsense, concocting stories.
I saw of this, the more I realized this wasn't how I wanted to spend my life. The other thing that happened was that the more I saw of the foundations of physics, the more I became convinced that most of the research there wasn't based on sound scientific principles. I know this sounds wild, like I'm the crank next door on YouTube, and maybe that's what I am, but I like to think that my argument was, and still is, very academic. I never intended it to be offensive. I just explained why thinking up new particles isn't a good strategy for progress in physics, and why that had gotten an entire discipline stuck. And naive as I was, I expected physicists to think about it. I expected rational debate. But that never came. No one was interested. No one is interested. They were interested in writing more papers. And that's what they need all these particles and other wild ideas for, to write papers, to get grants, to get postdocs, to write more papers, and round it goes. Meanwhile, I had moved half around the world because that's standard for postdocs. It's just expected of you. And at some point, you just accept the constant moving as normal because the only people you know also do it. It's incredibly hostile to personal life, detrimental to mental health, and women suffer from it more because our reproductive reality is that we need to start families earlier than men. By my mid-30s, I had somehow miraculously managed to get married and have 2 children, but I couldn't find a job anywhere near my husband. So for several years, I commuted from Frankfurt to Stockholm. And yes, those cities are actually in different countries. After 5 years of my murder commute, I just couldn't do it anymore. My mental health was worse than ever. I was permanently stressed out. I was feeling guilty for not working more and not spending more time with my kids. I had several nervous breakdowns. I was constantly ill. I decided I'd go back to Germany and not move out of the country again until the kids were out of school. Instead, I applied for research grants on projects that lasted 1, 2, or 3 years and that could be located in Germany. A lot of water has flown under the bridge since, so let me be honest. At this point, I'd figured out what you need to put into a grant proposal to get the money, and that's what I did. I applied for grants on research projects because it was a way to make money, not because I thought it would leave an impact in the history of science. It's not that what I did was somehow wrong. It was, and still is, totally state-of-the-art. I did what I said I'd do in the proposal. I did the calculation, I wrote the papers, I wrote my reports, and the reports were approved. Normal academic procedure. But I knew it was bullshit, just as most of the work in that area is currently bullshit, and just as most of academic research that your taxes pay for is almost certainly bullshit. The real problem I had, I think, is that I was bad at lying to myself. Of course, I tried to tell myself, and anyone who was willing to listen, that at least unofficially on the side I do the research that I thought was worth my time, but that I couldn't get money for because it was too far off the mainstream. But that research never got done because I had to do the other stuff that I actually got paid for. Then COVID came, and it reminded me how short life really is. I pivoted, applied for funding on the research that I wanted to do, that I was rather afraid wouldn't get funded. It didn't get funded, and so here we are on YouTube, where I talk about why I love science and hate it at the same time. This sounds like a sad story, and in some sense it is, because it's the story of a young scientist whose dream died. And it's the story of an old scientist who thinks they could have made a difference if it hadn't been necessary to get past 5 reviewers who didn't share my interests, because that's what it comes down to eventually. It's not that they say there's something wrong with your proposal. It just doesn't excite them because it's not the main current interest. My problem has always been that I just didn't fit in. But there's a happy ending in that I found you, a community of people who share my interests. Well, more or less. Or why the heck have you not been watching my video on indefinite causal structures? It's been quite a change to switch from academia to being self-employed. I had to learn how to write invoices. I had to register a business. I have a tax consultant, 2 agents, and a 12-person team that's distributed over half the world. Very steep learning curve. Mistakes were made. But eventually today I feel good about it, because unlike academic research, this is an honest trade. You get some of my knowledge, I get some of your attention. I like the simplicity of that. And I'm also heartened that there are so many people who care about obscure problems in the foundations of physics, though I think you underestimate the relevance of indefinite causal structures. So that's my story, no more and no less. Please.
All right, Sabine, before you wrap this up, I just want to say engagement with the audience is going to be great, and I hope I can be part of that engagement. And you know, I really feel privileged to see somebody stand up for themselves and realize it is all bullshit. You got it going on. I'm good. I'm liking this. All right, and thank you, Sabine.
Please do not think that my experience with academia is universal or that I've claimed it is. I know many people who love academia the way it is and who think it's working just fine. I'm just not one of them. Have never been, and I don't think I'll ever be. I'm not sure if I'm going to post this video. It's a bit too much, isn't it?
No, it is exactly perfect. And thank you for posting it, Sabine. And she was thinking about not posting it. That's what she said in the beginning.
Hi, Mark Barden at Sandy Hook Promise here.
Okay, I think she laid this out very, very, very well. And I went to the very end and I saw she's going to say that my experience is not universal. A lot of people love academia just the way it is. Those are the people that are in academia. And those are the other people that look up to academia because they're mental-sided, they're brainwashed into believing that these people are so superior to them that in order for them to be intelligent, they have to repeat what these people tell them to say. And she said it's all bullshit, and I agree with that. And so she's going to say it's not universal. Well, it is universal. As far as I'm concerned, it's systemic. And I'm telling you, I have gone everywhere to try to push my stuff. I'm not a quiet guy. And this has been 15 years going on. So it is universal. And anyway, she was not going to post this. She was a little worried. She thought it was about, she's going to get assaulted. And I'm sure she will, like hell, that's the way it works.
So that's my story, no more and no less. Please do not think that my experience with academia is universal or that I've claimed it is. I know many people who love academia the way it is and who think it's working just fine. I'm just not one of them.
Me either.
Have never been, and I don't think I'll ever be. I'm not sure if I'm going to post this video. It's a bit too much, isn't it?
No, it's exactly, precisely correct.